I've combined and summarised the content from my approaches videos into this approaches revision video. If you don't understand any of the content I cover here, go to my longer videos for a full explanation. But if you just need to cover the key points quickly, this is the video for you. I've decided not to include comparison of approaches in this video, but I did release a 10-minute comparison video just before this. You should watch that video next, while filling in a comparison grid. You can download my blank version for free. While there, you can download other free approaches resources, including a psychology timeline and biopsychology worksheets. If instead you want tutorial support videos with questions from all free papers, you can access over 16 hours of these, as well as hundreds of printable resources over on my Patreon. But enough of that, let's get started. Origins of psychology. Wundt, father of experimental psychology, set up the world's first psychological laboratory, the Institute of Experimental Psychology, Leipzig, Germany, 1870s, and produced the first academic journal that published psychological experiments, The Emergence of Psychology as a Science. Before Wundt, the study of the mind and behaviour was limited to philosophy and medicine. He was the first to use controlled empirical scientific research techniques to study the mind. Wundt's use of scientific methods helped establish psychology as an independent field of scientific research. In his structuralism research, Wundt used an experimental technique called introspection, with participants focusing inwards and reporting sensations, feelings, and images. Process. Participants were 1. Trained to report conscious experiences objectively, 2. Asked to focus on a sensory object, and 3. Asked to systematically report their experience, breaking their thoughts into separate elements. Wundt developed general theories of mental processes based on the experimental data collected. Evaluation. For his time, Wundt's work was highly scientific, primarily because of his controlled experiments, large sample sizes, and transparent methods. This systematic approach was a significant inspiration for subsequent scientific psychologists. Compared to modern psychological techniques, Wundt's introspective methods are considered subjective and are not classified as truly scientific, as participants cannot be relied on to report their mental states accurately. Wundt's use of inference to identify internal mental states has been criticized. Inferences are assumptions, so they could be mistaken. Behaviour psychologists rejected the study of internal mental states, seeing the mind as a black box. Wundt's use of inferences influenced cognitive psychologists. These researchers asked participants to complete tasks under experimental conditions and made inferences about the structure of internal mental processes like memory and attention. Learning approaches. The behaviourist approach. As a learning theory, behaviourists argue that behaviour is learned through experiences and interactions with the environment. Ivan Pavlov, classical conditioning, and B.F. Skinner, operant conditioning, were leading theorists. Behaviourists argue it's only possible to scientifically investigate what can be directly observed and measured. This includes what you do to a creature, stimulus, and the resulting behaviour, the response. As the mind cannot be directly observed, behaviourists argue it's a black box, so it's not suitable for scientific study. Classical conditioning, learning by association. Pavlov's research used two types of stimuli, a neutral stimulus, NS, a metronome, that initially did not produce a response, and an unconditioned stimulus, UCS, food, that naturally triggers a reflexive, unconditioned response, salivation in dogs. Procedure. Pavlov presented the NS with the UCS over several trials. Findings. The NS became a conditioned stimulus, producing the conditioned response, salivation, even when the food was not present. This showed the dogs had learned an association between the NS and the UCS, food. Operant conditioning, learning by reinforcement. When a creature performs voluntary responses, it learns from the consequences of those actions. Consequences that are rewarding reinforce a behaviour, so they're performed more frequently. And actions that result in consequences that are punishing are performed less. Skinner's research. Rats were placed in a Skinner box, a controlled environment with levers and a food dispenser. Skinner demonstrated positive reinforcement. Adding a pleasant stimulus, food, encouraged the desired behaviour, lever pulling. Negative reinforcement, removing an unpleasant stimulus, electric shock, encouraged behaviour, lever pulling. And extinction. If the reinforcing consequences stop, the behaviour will too. Evaluation. Considered scientific due to studying objectively observable and measurable stimulus-response mechanisms. Pavlov and Skinner established cause and effect relationships using controlled lab experiments that manipulated variables. One criticism of Pavlov and Skinner's use of animal subjects is their findings may not be generalizable to human behaviour. Complex social and cultural forces influence human behaviour, and humans possess greater intelligence. Behaviourist theory has practical applications, such as counter-conditioning treatments, flooding and systematic desensitization. The effectiveness of these therapies suggests the behaviourist principles they are based on are valid. Using behaviourist behavioural modification techniques to alter human behaviour has been viewed as manipulative, with harmful effects, as seen in gambling and social media companies' encouragement of compulsive behaviour. Behaviourist attempt to explain behaviour due to simplistic stimulus-response links is overly reductionist. Human behaviour like justice, culture and self-sacrifice are too complex to describe as a result of reinforcement. Learning approaches, social learning theory. Social learning theorists agree with behaviourist principles, learning from experience, but argue that human behaviour can't be fully understood without including the role of cognitive processes that happen between stimuli and response. The mediational processes are attention, retention, reproduction, and motivation, and must happen between observing a model perform a behaviour, stimuli, and imitating that behaviour, response. Observing others serves as a template for our actions. When we see someone rewarded for a behaviour, we're more likely to imitate it. A process social learning theorists call vicarious reinforcement. Witnessing someone punished for an action, vicarious punishment, makes us less likely to imitate that behaviour. Modelling. Individuals we observe and imitate are called models. Live models include parents, friends, and family members. We can also learn from symbolic models, such as characters from movies and books. Identification. We're more likely to imitate models with similar characteristics such as gender and age, or people perceived to be attractive or high status. Bandura 1961. Procedure. Participants were children aged 3 to 6. One group observed an adult demonstrating physical and verbal aggression towards a Bobo doll. The second group watched the adult play non-aggressively. Findings. Children exposed to an aggressive model were more likely to be aggressive themselves, imitation, and boys were more likely to mimic an aggressive male model, identification. Evaluation. SLT is supported by robust evidence. For example, the Bobo doll study has high internal validity due to its laboratory setting. This study ensured environmental control by having participants follow the same procedure. The Bobo doll study's ecological validity can be questioned, as the aggression observed in a controlled lab setting may not directly translate into real-world scenarios, such as imitating televised violence in school environments. Research supporting SLT, like the Bobo doll study, relies on inferences. Processes such as identification with a model, vicarious reinforcement, and mediating cognitive factors are not directly observable, but are inferred from behaviour. SLT is a less reductionist approach than behaviorism. SLT acknowledges the roles of consciousness and rationality, providing a more believable explanation for complex behaviours like aggression. SLT's concept of reciprocal determinism is a potentially more valid perspective than simpler deterministic approaches. Bandura argued that behaviour is not only influenced by the environment, but it also shapes it. The cognitive approach. Hey there, as you're still watching, I'm guessing you'll find this video useful. As I release content right up to the exams, don't forget to subscribe so you know when new videos are uploaded. Cognitive psychologists study internal mental processes, how information is used, processed, in the mind. This includes conscious and unconscious thoughts. Typical areas of research are attention, perception, and memory. As internal mental processes can't be directly observed, cognitive psychologists have to go beyond the research evidence and use inferences. This is making assumptions about the internal mental processes that produce the participant behaviour observed in an experiment. Schema are mental frameworks, collections of connected basic knowledge about a concept or object built from previous experience of the world. Role of schema. Schema work as mental shortcuts, used to quickly understand and navigate the world and interact with people and objects. However, schemas can lead to inaccurate memory, and negatively biased schemas can produce mental health issues. Theoretical models are flowchart representations of the steps of a mental process. For example, the multi-store model of memory, which shows how sensory input progresses from short-term memory to long-term memory. The computer model is an analogy between the operation of a computer's central processing unit, the CPU, running software programs, and the human brain conducting internal mental processes. This comparison suggests both systems receive inputs, generate outputs, and process information through a sequence of programmed steps. Cognitive neuroscience aims to scientifically identify and examine the neurological structures and chemical processes in the brain that are linked to internal mental processes. The emergence of cognitive neuroscience is due to the development of scanning techniques. PET and fMRI scanners allow researchers to observe brain activity directly. Evaluation. The cognitive approach is considered to be a scientific approach due to the use of highly controlled experiments. For example, many of the studies supporting the models of memory were conducted in a lab setting with large samples. Cognitive research makes inferences about internal mental processes from behaviour. Assumptions can be mistaken. For this reason, cognitive psychologists, despite their highly controlled lab studies, are not considered fully scientific. The computer model of the mind is criticised for being overly simplistic, machine reductionist. Other psychologists argue the human brain is far more complex than a CPU, and the mind experiences consciousness and emotions. Understanding the role of schemas has led to the practical, real-world application of cognitive behavioural therapy, CBT, where therapists help clients change negative thought patterns. Cognitive psychologists are soft determinists, arguing experience creates schemas in the brain's biological structure. Yet they also suggest that conscious thought processes provide personal control over actions, a core principle of CBT. The biological approach. The influence of biological structures on behaviour. Biological structures include the body-wide system of glands called the endocrine system. Glands influence behaviour by releasing chemical messengers called hormones. For example, the adrenal gland releases adrenaline as part of the fight or flight response, increasing alertness. The brain is the centre of all conscious and unconscious thought. Localization of function research has revealed biological structures within the brain that influence behaviour. For example, the frontal lobe is linked to rational decision-making, and the limbic system is the emotional centre of the brain. Influence of neurochemistry on behaviour. Neurotransmitters are released at the synapse to enable communication between two neurons. These neurotransmitters play a range of roles in influencing behaviour. Serotonin is associated with well-being and happiness. Dopamine is linked to pleasure. Noradrenaline influences attention, and glutamate affects learning and memory. The influence of genes on behaviour. Genes influence how the brain and neurons are formed and function. Genotypes are the genetic codes in the DNA for the characteristics of an organism. Phenotypes are the expression of the genotype. For example, being aggressive. The SERT gene has been associated with the development of OCD. This part of the genetic code influences serotonin transport, and imbalance has been linked to compulsions. Evolution and behaviour. Evolutionary psychologists argue that inherited, innate behaviours that provide survival advantages are selected for and become more common in future generations of a species. For example, in early hunter-gatherer societies, male aggression was beneficial for protecting families, hunting, and competing for mates. Less aggressive males were less likely to reproduce, leading to highly aggressive traits being passed on. Evaluations. Biological therapies that argue biological structures, neurochemistry, and genes influence behaviour are backed up by a range of empirical research studies, such as replicable and objective fMRI brain activation studies and drug trials. Biological processes alone are not a complete explanation for behaviour. Diaphysis stress response explanations include both biological and environmental factors and can be applied to mental health and aggression. The development of drug therapies is a practical application of biological research. These treat mental health conditions like OCD and depression by targeting neurochemical processes. For example, SSRIs reducing serotonin reuptake. The biological approach is seen as scientific due to advanced tools like fMRI scanners, genetic analysis, and direct measurements of hormones and neurotransmitters. These methods offer direct observation in controlled studies. The belief that behaviour is caused by biological factors, biological determinism, has significant implications. For example, arguing criminal behaviour is due to a criminal gene could challenge legal principles of responsibility. The psychodynamic approach. In Freud's psychodynamic theory, the psyche, mind, is a complex system that consists of three distinct parts: the conscious, thoughts we're aware of; the preconscious, not currently aware of but can be; and the unconscious, thoughts, desires, and memories that are not accessible to awareness but influence our behaviours and feelings. The tripartite structure of personality. The adult personality is constructed of three parts. The id, present from birth, pleasure principle, focuses only on satisfying personal needs and desires. The ego, from 18 months, reality principle, acts rationally as a mediator between the id and superego. The superego, from 3 to 5 years, morality principle, influences behaviour by using guilt where an individual's actions don't match its strict standards. moderating behaviour according to moral and societal expectations. Defence mechanisms are strategies involving the unconscious mind that the ego can use to manage conflicts. Denial, our refusal to accept the reality of a situation. Displacement, strong emotion is moved from the source of that emotion and placed onto a substitute target. Repression, an unpleasant memory or emotion is put into the unconscious and is inaccessible to consciousness. Psychosexual stages. At each stage, the child will experience an unconscious conflict that must be resolved. If the child is unable to resolve a stage, they become fixated, affecting adult personality. Oral stage, 0 to 1 year. Pleasure from their mouth during breastfeeding. Anal stage, 1 to 3 years. Pleasure comes from holding onto and expelling feces. Fixation equals anal retentive. Phallic stage, 3 to 5 years. Boys experience the Oedipus complex, a sexual desire for their mother, and castration anxiety. Jung suggests girls experience the Electra complex. Latency stage, 6 to 12 years. Sexual energy, libido, is dispersed across the body. Genital stage, 12 plus years. Sexual desire is in the adult form. Evaluations. Freud's theories have had significant influence on modern scientific psychological theories. His emphasis on early childhood experience influenced Bowlby, and his exploration of the unconscious mind influenced cognitive theorists. Freud's ideas have intuitive appeal, face validity. Boys often have a stronger attachment to their mother. Early trauma can influence anxiety. People often identify examples of defense mechanisms such as denial and repression. Many of Freud's ideas lack scientific credibility, as they were developed and supported through case studies and by interpreting his clients' memories, introspections, and dreams. Freud's interpretations were potentially biased. Freud often framed his theories and definitions in ways that make them untestable. This means that Freudian concepts like the superego lack falsifiability, the ability to demonstrate a theory is wrong through empirical testing. Practical application. DeMatt's meta-analysis of psychoanalytic therapy found that many individuals claim to have been successfully treated. This suggests the psychodynamic ideas on which psychoanalysis is based have some validity. Humanistic psychology. Humanists argue that human behaviour is too complex to study through traditional, reductionist scientific methods, which identify and test simple cause and effect relationships. Instead, they suggest a holistic approach to explaining behaviour, considering all possible influences on behaviour and its interactions. Humanists argue that external causes don't determine our behaviour. Instead, we have personal agency through free will, the ability of individuals to shape our own lives through conscious decision-making. Humanistic psychology focuses on personal growth, not mental illness. Self-actualization, the highest level of psychological development, is the state of realizing your full potential and performing at your best. Maslow's hierarchy of needs argues that foundational needs must be met before an individual can achieve self-actualization. The hierarchy starts with the most basic needs: physiological, safety, love and belonging, then esteem, followed by self-actualization. Carl Rogers argued congruence is essential for achieving self-actualization. Congruence is the alignment between your perceived self, self-image, and the ideal self, who you aspire to be. A significant gap is incongruence. Becoming congruent is possible by enhancing the perceived self, or developing a more realistic ideal self. This is helped by reducing conditions of worth, which are expectations from others that must be met to earn their love or approval. Carl Rogers' client-centered therapy emphasizes the importance of the present and the future over the past. The therapist's role is to assist clients in achieving congruence by giving unconditional positive regard, to enhance their perceived self, and as clients are the experts in their own lives, supporting them in resolving their own issues. Evaluations. It's considered non-scientific due to its reliance on non-experimental, qualitative methods, which results in a lack of empirical evidence for its claims. Additionally, central concepts such as self-actualization lack operationalization. Its holistic approach to explaining behaviour could be more accurate, capturing the complexity of human experience. Other, simple, reductionist explanations often face criticism for overlooking multiple contributing factors. The humanistic view that humans act with free will has face validity. People have a subjective experience of autonomy and self-direction, and like to believe their actions are based on their own free choices. Humanistic ideas have had practical applications. Maslow's hierarchy of needs has been widely applied. It's improved performance in sports and enhanced employee satisfaction and motivation in the business world. Developed in 1960s America, Humanistic Psychology may be culturally biased towards Western individualism. It emphasizes self-actualization through personal success, which contrasts with the collectivist values of many cultures. Don't forget you can now test yourself on the Approaches unit with the PsychBoost app. If you want to try out the app, all the topics in Paper 1 are free, and you can get it on iOS or Android. If you want to see model answers or access my other resources, there's also Patreon. Speaking of Patreon, I do want to thank all of my patrons for their support. With the help of all of these students and teachers, I'm able to teach part-time so I can work on the main mission of PsychBoost, the development of a free-to-watch and, hopefully high-quality, A-level psychology course. And a special thank you to Azzy Taylor for supporting at the developer level. So thanks to them, good luck to you with your revision, and I'll see you in the next PsychBoost video.